Well, today we gotta reckon with the rebirth of historical Total War. I'll believe that when I see it, but what it is Creative Assembly's promise that they've made, as they've now celebrated the 25th anniversary of Total War. But the thing is, there's currently no historical Total War game in sight, at least not for the short term. There is something fairly large for the long term, and something a lot more important. And also, don't mind the funky hair. I just had a transplant around the crown, which does mean I've got this weird Peaky Blinders cut in and around the donor site. It'll be back to normal soon. Now, the big thing, the headline thing, is that Medieval 3 has been revealed. And that is genuinely huge, but it's also still a long, long way off. In the meantime, well, that's where things get serious. Creative Assembly are keeping Total War Warhammer going by pretty much any means necessary. They're essentially buying time, but they're buying time whilst they rebuild the foundations of the whole series. Now, worst case, that's a whole bunch of marketing fluff, but given what we know, and what's even been leaked to us in this office, they really have needed to do that. That's what actually matters, because as of late, the technical state of Total War has been near enough an unrecoverable technical nightmare that has basically hounded them for years upon years upon years. So, we've got a lot to talk about today. I've got to start with the lay of the land. So 2025 has not really been great for Creative Assembly. After years of layoffs, they finally found their financials were stabilizing, but they kinda didn't have anything new to offer, right? There were just two public updates. The Shadows of Change DLC for Warhammer 3, and then the newly released Tides of Torment, which, yeah, actually did somehow come out. To say their release cadence got behind schedule would be putting it lightly. Now, the first of those, Shadows of Change, it didn't really go down that well. It landed amongst a wave of patches that were basically trying to placate player complaints, but those patches ended up revealing kinda just how broken the game is, in a real deep way. And that's something that's been going on and infuriating players over the last few months. And our most recent big update with Total War was basically all that frustration boiling over. Essentially, bugs reared their head in the context of a deep stagnancy, so the community felt pretty bad. But then hit the Black Friday sale over on Steam, alongside the newest patch and the newest DLC. And the good news is the recent Steam reviews have actually spiked back up to mostly positive. A very rare thing for this game. And the total reviews are shifting up as well, only a percentage from positivity now, so there is a bit of stabilization here. And that is what CA have desperately wanted, and I guess needed. Because for them to have any credibility when they say, "Trust me bro, we're doing the foundations," well, they kinda need to look like they've not just cut and ran. That's been the news coming up to the showcase. So now, let's talk about the big showcase. The event that kicked all this off was their showcase, and it was the culmination of months of them doing streams and retrospectives, celebrating 25 years of Total War. And they really have done a lot of celebrating, or, hyping, and it's all basically led to this stream. And what we actually got in the stream was 30 minutes of Warhammer, 15 minutes of breaking down how the series' new engine will actually solve problems, and 15 minutes discussing a new game. Well, that game being Medieval 3, but you're not going to be playing it anytime soon. Let's do Warhammer first then. So, as almost everyone predicted, the Lords of the End Times will be the new DLC. You'll be starting with Nagash, the Lord of Necromancers, and he'll have 3 other legendary lords, which will all be part of this paid DLC. Now, the base game is going to be updated with new endgame mechanics, which are all tied into the End Times narrative. A controversial chapter in Warhammer, but of course the one that is tied to, the Vermintide games. Now, gameplay-wise, it'll be making use of the Realm of Chaos battlefields, which, we'll see how those end up playing out. Now, this is all still taking place in Immortal Empires, so the good news is they're not repeating the very silly Total War Warhammer 3 campaign problems. Basically, they know the thing that actually matters is the sandbox, so the end times will be integrated into the sandbox, rather than being its own little gimmicky thing. So, that's what's going on with Warhammer 3, and it's planned to launch in 2026. Then, there's the big thing, that being Medieval 3. We don't have a date, and here's what they say about it.
This is more than just a new game. It's the rebirth of historical Total War.
That's their tagline. It certainly is music to my ears, but all we've really seen is a trailer that's basically just teased the return of medieval stuff and historical Total War games. Now, the staff themselves say the game is in, quote, early pre-production, which essentially means a small enough number of probably quite veteran people are working on it, but likely nothing crazy in terms of resource allocation yet. I've got to imagine that's probably all going into the engine. Now, they did have plenty of nice sentiments, talking about going deeper into the historical aspect, deeper than they have before, actually offering people ways to engage with the world in more ways than just combat. Obviously, we can have a bit of a think about Paradox games there. But what is absolutely clear is that Medieval 3 actually won't be the next game that Creative Assembly releases, which would make you think the thing we'll be getting next won't be as grand and huge. But they're definitely not framing it that way. They've basically said that the next game they release will be, quote, one of the most ambitious projects in the franchise's history, marking the beginning of a brand new era. And basically, they're going to go and announce this at the Game Awards. Now, the assumption is that this new game will be the other big thing that they've talked about because, well, this new Total War game probably would be like nothing that they've ever made before. Maybe so much that they basically need to rebuild their engine. Let's talk about the tech side, because they're basically teasing Total War players with the insane notion of a Total War game that I guess works as expected. Kind of crazy. Now, they've said that going forward, their new War Core engine will be the strongest foundation. And it basically seems, at least in terms of their public framing, that it's a direct response to all the criticisms that we've heard reported from insiders. Basically, that they were using toolsets that were insanely unwieldy. We've been told that ourselves. Basically, their tools were hard to develop with, and what would happen is individual teams would make improvements for whatever game they were doing. Sometimes those improvements would be folded back into the dough and used in the next game, but not always. So they basically ended up having loads of different forks of the engine, so rather than being able to do really good software engineering, a lot of their technical staff were basically just firefighting all the time. So the overall idea with Warcore basically is those problems won't be a problem. Now, they say the engine is designed to be improvable over time, streamlining and improving things for their devs. And of course, if you're at CA and you think the reality maybe doesn't match, don't be afraid to tell us. A few of you have told us before, and certainly the players would want to know. I certainly hope that this is serious, though. I mean, for players at least, the intent here is that Total War games should actually match modern expectations. That meaning more fidelity, better visuals, better detail, but not at the cost of performance. Performance obviously has been all over the place, and I guess all of this stuff is just built in forks upon forks of whatever the hell that launch abomination of Rome 2 was. Wasn't that fun? But speaking of fun, we all love a bit of dismemberment and gore whenever we come home from work. And the good news is that's just all going to be baked in terms of the new fidelity options. There's not going to be any more blood DLC going on. There are other cool things as well. They're promising destructible environments. They've showed a house being wrecked by incoming fire. And then that feeds into battle AI improvements, which hopefully will happen. If they meaningfully improve that battle AI, then honestly, we could be in a way better place for this series of games. Because I think ultimately, the biggest stagnation has just been in the core gameplay. Warhammer's done an amazing job of adding neat new mechanics and twists on top of a fundamentally out-of-date thing. So I'm at least excited at the prospect of them getting proper engineering time to get this right. Now, there's then campaign AI. It's always a bit of a bugbear, and the promise they have is, quote, future modeling. So effectively the AI is predicting actions that you will take based on current conditions and acting accordingly. And they've also teased improvements for vehicles and strafing, which maybe will be relevant in the upcoming game that we'll talk about soon. But there is another thing that this new engine will allow for, and that is console releases. Because playing a Total War game with a gamepad sounds amazing and fun. Bit weird, but I can see them doing it. And I guess, much like, say, Football Manager and Sega's Japanese franchises, they do just want to be able to sell everything everywhere, obviously. Now, Creative Assembly promised this is in addition to PC releases, but it will depend heavily on the support that they get for porting. They've clearly seen some fairly good returns in Feral Interactive. Basically, Feral Interactive did the mobile ports and the Mac ports. Now, I still cannot understand playing, say, Medieval 2 Total War on a phone screen, but those phone ports are actually getting new DLCs. So I guess some people are actually playing them. I tried and just found the controls to be completely impossible. Now, all of this stuff with their next game and Medieval 3 is quite far away in the future. It's the sort of thing that'll be handled by the core Creative Assembly studio. You may be wondering then, what about Creative Assembly Sophia? Well, they're just going to have to continue carrying the entire company on their back for a little bit longer. And that's because Total War Warhammer is not just a game, no. It is a platform, and despite the end times being the literal send-off for the entire Warhammer Fantasy Battle tabletop game, the press releases are actually quite explicit, where they say there will be more DLC for Total War Warhammer, and you'll note there, they don't say Warhammer 3. No, this is DLC for the actual game, which is Immortal Empires, and that's something that you can now access if you've got the first 2 games, or even if you just go and buy the Lords of the End Times DLC, which I guess means that'll kind of function as an expandalone thing. But basically, with all of this happening, the pool of potential DLC sales, well, it will just quite skyrocket. All this should mean good things for the bottom line, because people can just go and buy the brand new DLC that'll get them into Immortal Empires, where they can then buy 85 trillion other DLCs, which hopefully will make the line go up, which ultimately is just kind of what this company has needed for a long-ass time. So, CA Sophia will do that. They'll keep the numbers alive until something new happens. And of course, that new thing is not going to be medieval. There's going to be something coming first. Now, we will talk about what the next game is, but I think the big one most people care about is medieval. And where it gets interesting is I think they're trying to solve one of their big old problems, which is just that, the line didn't go up. What do I mean when I say the line didn't go up? Well, a lot of the rot that set in with this company is they basically realized a long-ass time ago that they were struggling to expand their overall audience. So because of that, they kind of pivoted towards just doing yearly releases, which, didn't really end up great. Now, one of the things that could expand their audience again for historical games is basically, taking a look at Paradox, seeing what they're doing. So, let's talk about that. Europa Universalis 5 was a particularly, maybe peculiarly, stable and well-regarded launch for Paradox, and that was at least in part because of how it was communicated to players. And I think what we're seeing is Creative Assembly actually copying that approach. So let me explain. Project Caesar was announced in 2024 after 4 years of prototyping and testing, all under the guise of development blogs from Paradox Tinto. Now, those then continued through the full reveal and right up to the launch, basically all designed around getting feedback from players on loads of different aspects. It was effectively an early access where players just got to see one feature at a time and then comment on it, which seems to have actually worked. I'm maybe thinking of another big grand strategy game, Civilization, that probably could have done a bit more of that. But anyway, whenever Creative Assembly talked about Medieval 3, it was all in the context of a very similar pitch to what Paradox made to their people. The direct quote is, "We're in early pre-production of Medieval 3 and we're announcing early to take you in our development journey with us where we can via blogs and other updates. We've never announced something this early before and we're excited to engage with you throughout this journey." Now, that can just seem like a bit of corpo speak, but I do actually think it matters here. And that's because the last 2 Total Wars very much suffered from not meeting player expectations. Pharaoh was disappointing because of how thin it seemed in terms of content, whilst it was being framed as a full, fat, real historical Total War game, and not a smaller Sagas game. And then there was the campaign of Total War Warhammer 3. It was not great. It was a lot worse than the rest of the game. So that basically meant that in both of those games, they had a lot of firefighting in day one. And you could argue a lot of that firefighting was stuff that, well, players probably could have just told you about, like, years before, had they have known whenever some of those core decisions were being locked in. And of course, across the franchise, just about every Total War ends up reworking systems, factions, units, and stuff after launch. So, doing that before launch, actually getting some buy-in from players ahead of time, that's hopefully going to keep historical players happy. I mean, I'm one of those players, and I'll tell you what, if it's like this and it's humble and it's asking for feedback, that rings very differently to the hype campaigns of Rome 2, which I think we all remember, and to be honest, did just irrevocably change my relationship with that company and the fundamental level of trust I could ever have with them again. So them doing this seems at least like a bit of a move to get that trust back. And I think this feels even more important when you consider why Medieval 3 was revealed now, despite it not releasing for years. So, the other game then. It's going to be revealed December 11th, and it's probably not a historical title, or at least it's not a follow-up to anything Creative Assembly has made before. But it is something that Sega are banking on to sell. I mean, the whole showcase is basically part of Sega's plan for a, quote, turnaround of the Total War brand. Now, there's talk of several things. There's the obvious Warhammer 40k game, there's the rumored Star Wars title, and in recent weeks, some people have even suggested a Total War Lego game, which to be honest seems insane to me, but after the insanity seeps in, I could actually see that being fun. Still, I think that would be fit for a spin-off, not a big main title. But where we can put puzzle pieces together is that at least two of those game concepts would be better supported by their new engine handling vehicles and strafing. Both the 40k and Star Wars would need that kind of thing. As would, say, World War I or World War II, which would be pretty dope, but I don't really think that's what they'll be doing. And it's actually right here that I recognize I'm being pandered to, in a very Todd Howard way, by which I mean, as a historical Total War fan, if the next thing was Warhammer 40k, or it was Star Wars, and that was all it was talked about, I would probably lose my mind and become a little bit depressed, because the thing I care about the most is, obviously, historical Total War. Now, what they're doing here almost reminds me, though I don't want the negative connotations of it, but it almost reminds me of the wild move of announcing the next Elder Scrolls game to soften the blow of the Elder Scrolls Blades, a mobile game that by now I think almost everyone has forgotten. Just that in this case, they know people like me are pretty annoying and like a lot of detail when it comes to the historical games, so they've obviously done it like this, all in a way that's involved new promises like the engine, the player involvement, solving long-standing issues, making us think a bit more about the politics and the historical simulation side, to basically just kind of make us think, all right, well, that's clearly your long-term play. In the near term, yeah, you've probably just juiced up your combat stuff so you can do a 40k or a Star War. I think that's basically their plan. It does mean Medieval 3 will be a long-ass time away, and the near future does seem to be a bit more fantastical. But not nearly as fantastical as $100 games. It seems that a lot of that scuttlebutt didn't really go anywhere, and, well, we've got some fun data about game prices actually going down in Steam. And if you want to learn all about that, just click the video on your screen as soon as my face disappears.